welcome to the introduction to Masechet Gittin. Masechet Gittin deals with divorce, and what's interesting to see is that the Masechet deals primarily with the ways that divorce takes effect, and it doesn't deal at all, except from the very, very last Mishnah of the tractate, with the grounds for divorce. What are the claims that the couple make toward one another that provide the basis for divorce? These are discussed much more in Masechet Ketubot and in Masechet Sotah, and as I mentioned, in the very last Mishnah of the Masechet, which we will discuss. What I want to demonstrate today is that almost all of the laws detailed in this Masechet find their roots in the two brief psukim that discuss divorce in the Torah in Parashat Ki Tetzeh. So I'm sharing my screen here, and you can see the psukim from Deuteronomy chapter 24. Ki yikach ish isha uve'ala, v'haya im lo timtza chen be'enav ki matza va'ervat davar, וכתב לה ספר כריתות ונתן בידה ושילחה מביתו. ויצאה מביתו והלכה והייתה לאיש אחר. So if a man takes a woman into his household as his wife and becomes her husband, and then she fails to please him because he finds an ervat davar, something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill of divorcement. He hands it to her, Natan beyada, v'shilcha mibeito, and he sends her away from his house. And she leaves his household and goes and becomes the wife of another man. So if we proceed with the order of these psukim, we can see that the grounds for the divorce, both in the verse and logically, should have been discussed first, right? Because the verse says, "V'haya im lo timtza chen be'enav ki matza ba'ervat davar." So she failed to please him, and that's what causes the divorce. But as I mentioned, this will only be discussed at the very, very end of the Masechet. And instead, the Masechet is very much focused on the second half of verse 1. And it derives many different laws from each word of this verse. So first, the verse v'chatav, the phrase v'chatav. Much of the Masechet focuses on the laws of writing the writ of divorce. Who is permitted to write the get? Can it be the husband himself? Can it be a messenger, an emissary, a shaliach, for writing the get? Do you need a specific kind of sofer? What about if a person wanted to write a get but suddenly doesn't know how to write on his own and suddenly became mute, and he wants to tell others to write the get for him, but he can't, so can he signal in a certain way? Similarly, all the laws that discuss get al t'nai, a get which has some kind of condition or stipulation in it. For example, this will be your get if you give me a certain amount of money. This is a case that's discussed in chapters 6 and 7 of the Masechet. So all of these laws have to do with how do you write the get, what is permitted to be written, and they all derive from this word v'katav. But the verse doesn't end there. The verse continues with the word la, to her, which seems to be a much less laden with meaning word. And yet, this is one of the words from which the Chachamim derive many, many of the most important laws in Masechet Gittin. One of the most important laws that they learn from the word la is that the get has to be what is called lishma. It has to be for a specific intention and condition. So the get has to be written with the name of the husband and the name of the wife. And later takana decrees that all of their different names, so if a person has both an English name and a Hebrew name, all the names need to be written in the get, and the time and the place where the get is written need to be included in this. And in contrast to Masechet Sotah and the last chapters that we saw in Masechet Sotah, which describes ceremonies that need to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh, specifically in Hebrew, from different parts of this Masechet, as well as other Masechtot as well, we see that the get was written in the time of Chazal, not necessarily in Hebrew, but rather it was written in language that could be understood to the couple. And so we see all kinds of different texts that are used to perform the get. There wasn't one standardized phrase that was used. For example, in Bavli Kiddushin 5, Shmuel uses the phrases Harei at meshulachat, Harei at megureshet, Harei at muteret lechol adam. So you are sent away, you are divorced, you are permitted to any man. In the Tosefta, we find the phrase Ani hayom girashtich, I divorced you today. In the Yerushalmi, we find the phrase Ani ploni megareshet ishti, so I such and so divorced my wife. All of those expressions are in Hebrew, but in the Mishnah, in chapter 9, Rabbi Yehuda describes an Aramaic phrase that is used that was also apparently part of the lingua franca that was used to divorce wives. So all of this relates to the idea of lishma, that there are specific rules about how the intention of the husband is expressed in the get. The verse continues and says, "V'chatav la sefer kritut," right? He should write to her a book, literally, or a bill of divorcement. And the word sefer indicates many of the laws of shtarot, of different kinds of legal writings. But what's interesting is that in contrast to other shtarot that we have, like contracts or various other kinds of texts, legal texts that are described in rabbinic literature, in those cases, the shtar is just evidence of some kind of action that took place. So for example, if we think about the Kiddushin, the shtar is the witness testimony that there was actually Kiddushin between the husband and the wife. By contrast, in divorce, the get, the shtar of the get, the actual writ of divorce, is part of the act of divorce. What creates the divorce, what creates the legal difference in the status of the husband and wife, is that the husband gives the writ of divorce to his wife. So it's not only evidence and it's not only testimony, but it's actually part of the divorce. And that also explains why it's so important that it will be lishma, that there will be a very clear intention that's described in the bill of divorce. Furthermore, the word sefer in the Torah indicates that a document is not just a legal document between two individual parties, but it's a document that has some kind of public status. For example, Sefer HaBrit at Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Sefer Torah that the king has to write for himself, which is something he doesn't write only as an individual. Similarly, as we learned in Masechet Sotah, Parashat Sotah, which is written on parchment, is called a Sefer. So in all of these cases, it's not just something that's going on between two individuals, but rather the document has some kind of public status. And so too in the case of Gittin, the rabbis understand the use of the word sefer in this verse to indicate that divorce isn't just dissolving an intimate relationship between a husband and wife, but that for the benefit of future relationships, this dissolvement, this annulment of the relationship needs to have a legal and public aspect. And that aspect is given through the function of the edim, through the function of the witnesses. And the witnesses play a very, very significant role in this tractate. There are at least two kinds of witnesses that are described over and over again. Edei Chatima, the witnesses for the signatories of the divorce, and Edei Mesira, the witnesses that give testimony that the writ of divorce was actually given from the husband to the wife. And actually, there's a very important and central dispute in the Masechet, which recurs in various sub-disputes, which is who are the two witnesses that are most important for putting the divorce into effect. Is it the Edei Chatima, the witnesses who sign on the text of the divorce itself, or is it the Edei Mesira, the witnesses to the granting of the divorce to the wife? Now, this dispute, which is a dispute between Rabbi Meir, who says it's the signatories, versus Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it's the Edei Mesira, describe two different approaches to what is the essence of the get. If it's the witnesses who sign on the get who are the most important, who give the get its legal status and significance, then the get is a legal document just like other shtarot, just like other legal documents. But if we're talking about Edei Mesira, the witnesses who testify that there was actually granting of divorce, that these are the most important for the divorce to take effect, then the divorce is actually primarily an uncovering of the husband's wish towards his wife, which is given legal status through putting that wish into writing and giving the written document which testifies to the husband's desire to the wife. So as I said, this dispute actually shifts and fractures into many questions that arise in the Masechet. For example, when discussing the importance of the writing of the get lishma. So for example, Rabbi Meir, who thinks that Edei Chatima Karte, that the signatories are the important witnesses, argues that even if a husband found a get in the trash, bashva, and he happened to find a get that had the same names as his own name and his wife's name, he can reuse that recycled get, and he can have witnesses sign off on that get and give it to the wife, and the get will be kosher because he doesn't attribute significance to the actual writing of the get, but only to the signatures. On the other hand, Rabbi Eliezer attributes more significance to the writing of the text itself, and not only to the signatures of the witnesses, and so he would not approve of a get like that. Similarly, the Mishnah rules that anyone can write a get, even cheresh katan, so even someone who is deaf or a minor, or someone who is an imbecile. But the Gemara on page 23 limits this Mishnah and says that according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that Edei Mesira Karte, that what's important is the witnesses who testify to the delivery of the get, they say that according to that approach, then it's necessary, even if a cheresh katan can actually write the get, it's necessary that someone who is bal dat, someone who is full mental capacity will stand next to the Cheresh Shoter V'Katan while they're writing the get, so that it will be written Lechem, right, Lishma, of a specific man and woman. And according to another interpretation there's a distinction between two other important phrases that we'll see a lot throughout the Masechet, the tofes of the get and the toref haget. The tofes haget is the standard text of the get that appears in any get, and that can be written by a cheresh shoter v'katan. The toref haget is where, the blanks are filled out with the names of the couple and the place and the date. And these, according to this interpretation, must be written by a Baal Dat, by someone who has full mental capacity. So this dispute also depends on the fundamental dispute between what's most important, the witnesses who testify to the signing of the witnesses who sign on the get and testify that the get has been written in a certain way, or the witnesses that testify to the delivery of the get. So all of these laws, very extended laws about testimony, actually derive from the idea that this get is not just any shtar, it's not just any legal document, but it's a sefer. It's a document that has particular public importance, because the dissolvement of a marriage is not just a matter for the husband and wife, as it will have ramifications. If the wife marries another man, we want to ensure that she's not an eshet ish and that the children are not mamzerim, and therefore it has public significance, and that's why we need to ensure that there are witnesses to this dissolution. The verse continues, and if we look again at the verse, the next word after v'katav la sefer kritut is v'natan beyada. That's the next phrase, and the rabbi's import significance to this phrase as well. V'natan indicates that the husband has to give the divorce to the wife. However, early on the rabbis established that it's not only the husband, but there can also be a shaliach, there can also be a messenger who stands in for the husband and gives the writ of divorce to the wife. And the word beyada, v'natan beyada, indicates that the divorce doesn't necessarily need to be given into her very hand, but it needs to be given into her reshut, into a space that belongs to her. So this means that there can actually be more than one messenger. There can be shaliach holacha, a shaliach of the husband, who takes the get from him and takes it to the wife. And there can also be a shaliach kabbalah. There can also be a messenger who accepts the writ of divorce for the wife. And furthermore, there's a lot of discussion of which is his reshut and which is her reshut. For example, if a husband throws the get into the wife's rooms or into the wife's home, then she's divorced. But if he throws it to her when she's in his house, then she won't be divorced. He has to actually put it into her hands. Or if she's standing in Reshut HaRabim, she's standing out in the street, and the husband or the messenger throw the divorce to her. So if it lands close to her, she will be divorced. But if it lands sort of, halfway between where the husband is standing and the wife is standing, then it'll be a case of safek. It won't be clear that she'll be divorced. She'll be what's called megoreshet ve'ena megoreshet. So all of these laws of where each of their spaces is, and many questions that have to do with shlichut are very, very central to the Masechet. One of these laws is that as long as a husband has sent the writ of divorce with a shaliach, he can annul the divorce as long as it hasn't reached the hand of the wife. But as soon as it reaches her hand, she's divorced and he can't cancel the get anymore. However, at a later period, the rabbis realized that this could cause a lot of difficulties. let's say we have a husband who is, far away in another country, and he sends the divorce with a messenger to his wife, and he doesn't know exactly when the messenger is going to arrive. And obviously he can't just, WhatsApp the messenger and ask him. And suddenly he has second thoughts and he decides to annul the divorce. However, we don't know exactly at what moment the divorce reached the wife. So this can create very problematic situations. And so at a later point, Rabban Gamliel HaZaken created a decree, a takana, and the takana was that a husband should not cancel the divorce as long as it's not either in front of the messenger that he sent or in front of the wife. Now, this decree, this takana, is the first of a series of takanot that is described in chapters 4 and 5 of the Masechet. And the Masechet deals extensively with takanot, which are mipnei tikkun haolam. They're all takanot for the repairment of the world. And this is a central theme that appears in these chapters in the Masechet. I want to say a few words about the grounds for divorce before we return to the overall structure of the Masechet. So if you think about it, marriage is a kind of creation of an isur arayot that is different from all other isurei arayot, because in all of the isurei arayot in the Torah, they're created by nature, right? If I am born to a certain mother and my brother is also born to that mother, then that's considered a relationship of arayot, and we cannot have an intimate relationship between us. And that's true for all of the arayot except marriage. Marriage creates a new isur eshet ish, which means that a woman is prohibited from having intercourse with other men, but it's not something that is created by nature. It's something that is created by people. And divorce, even when a couple gets divorced, they don't actually go back to the same status that they had before the marriage. The creation of this status of arayot in the marriage creates a lingering connection between the couple, even after they're married. So, for example, a husband's not allowed to remarry a wife that he is divorced. And even after a couple is divorced, a husband is not allowed to marry the mother or the daughter of the woman that he divorced. So there's some kind of lingering relationship that remains. I say this as background to looking at the last Mishnah of the Masechet, which deals with the grounds for the divorce. And we see here a three-way machloket in this Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah is a machloket between Beit Shammai and Bet Hillel. Bet Hillel say a husband should not divorce his wife unless he found an irva in her, unless he found something obnoxious about her, according to the translation that we use. Shenemar ki matza ba irvat. Bet Hillel omrim, Bet Hillel say, no, afilu ikdicha tavshilo, even if she ruined his dinner, he can divorce her, because it says ki matza ba davar. Okay, so the focus is on irvat versus davar. This dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel actually reflects earlier machloket that we know about from the time of the Second Temple. Both from Christian sources and from sources from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we know that there was a very, very strong objection to divorce, unless the divorce is a result of adultery. And why was there such an objection? Because, as we said before, the marriage creates a bond of arayot between the couple. It becomes almost as though they were brother and sister, right? So it's something that creates a relationship which has very strict prohibitions, and those prohibitions linger forever. And so in many early Jewish circles, there was an idea that marriage is a kind of bond that cannot be dissolved. On the other hand, some sources describe the Prushim, the rabbi's predecessors, as citing the verse V'katav la-sefer kritut to support the idea that divorce is permitted. So here in this Mishnah, we see this dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel reflecting an earlier dispute. Bet Shammai seemed to be reflecting the early position that divorce is actually not an option, except in one case, in the case of adultery, while Bet Hillel are objecting to that idea, and Bet Hillel are continuing the argument of the Prushim and saying, no, anything that a husband sees wrong in his wife can be grounds for a divorce. And Rabbi Akiva then takes this position even further and says, Afilu matzah acheret nova mimena. Even if he found just another woman who he likes better, that's enough for him to divorce. And notice how, in contrast to the first two opinions who cite the pasuk, ki matzah ba'ervat davar, Rabbi Akiva is saying, ki matzah acheret nova mimena, right? So he's using the same phrase, but he's playing on the verse, and he's saying, no, even if he just, basically for no reason wants to divorce his wife, divorce is still valid. So we see that there's a dispute and a tension in early sources about should divorce be permitted at all? Should there be specific grounds for divorce? And ultimately, the view of Rabbi Akiva prevails, and the idea that really the husband's wish, the husband's desire, is what drives the divorce. There are some opinions that we find in Braitot in the Talmud which suggest that there are certain grounds that are necessary, and these grounds actually derive from the phrase ervat davar. So, for instance, a woman who goes out to the marketplace when she's dressed immodestly, that could be a ground for divorce. However, we see this idea that in general, Rabbi Akiva's position prevails, which means that there's a very, very strong asymmetry between the husband and wife in Jewish divorce, which continues to this day, despite certain takanot that have been put in place that require that the wife also show her desire to accept the divorce. Nonetheless, the original idea that what drives the divorce is the husband's wish, and the husband's wish is actually more significant than the wife, that's something that's very important in the laws of divorce. And this leads me to the overall structure of the Masechet, because what we see in the Masechet is that the Masechet is divided into three parts. Chapters 1 through 3 deal extensively with the laws of sending the get, the laws of writing the get. Chapters 6 through 9 deal with general laws of shlichut, of messengers, and also continue to deal with the laws of delivering the get and of signing the get. So there isn't that much of a thematic difference between the first part and the third part of the Masechet. Where do we see a very significant difference? In chapters 4 and 5, in the heart of the Masechet, which deal, as I said, with the decrees that are directed toward tikkun olam, towards repairing the world. And in the very, very heart of these prakim, only in the Bavli, we find also Agadot HaChurban, a sequence of many stories about the destruction of the temple. And it's unclear what these are doing here, because in the Yerushalmi, they're actually found in Masechet Ta'anit in a much more appropriate setting. The Mishnah in Masechet Ta'anit describes 5 calamities that happened on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, and 5 calamities that occurred on the 9th of Av, among them the destruction of the temple. And so the Yerushalmi, all of the stories about the destruction of the temple are found there. But in the Bavli, they're found in the very heart of Masechet Gittin. And the question is, why? And what I'd like to suggest is that this structure of the Masechet is actually indicating to us that divorce for the rabbis is destruction, right? Even though they accept Rabbi Akiva's position, they're still in a certain way accepting also Beit Shammai's position, that divorce is something that shouldn't happen at all, that it's something that is, as the Talmud says, that any couple that divorces, then the altar sheds tears for that couple. But on the other hand, these stories are embedded within the chapters that deal with takanot letikun olam, rabbinic decrees that are intended towards repairing the world. So there's also an awareness that divorce may be something that may have to happen, and that the rabbis have to take the initiative to do what is necessary in order to use halakha to create a repaired world, both in terms of the couple and in broader concentric circles. And furthermore, this idea of rabbinic decree and the power that the rabbis have to repair the world is also instrumental to this day in attempting to fix and repair some of the asymmetry that has been created by rabbinic divorce. So even though there's a very, very strong asymmetry between husband and wife, that the husband's wish to divorce his wife is basically enough to effect the divorce, nonetheless, there are all kinds of mechanisms that the rabbis put in place, some of which are described in the Masechet, like get al tnai, like hafka'at kiddushin, the annulment of kiddushin, and in our day, prenuptial agreements, for instance. These are all ways that the rabbis can work within halakha to create a more just and more repaired world.